Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekly reading report. It's time for my weekly reading report where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. And I read some stuff, so let's talk about it. Roger, you ready? Look how ready Roger is. He can't wait to get started. Okay, let's get started then. I will break out my list for the 500 book challenge, the never-ending challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. Okay, what are we up to now? Book number 246. 246. That book was this one. Pirate of the Pacific, a Doc Savage adventure. Look at that awesome cover with Doc Savage and his torn shirt. So this was awesome. I am reading all of the Doc Savage novels slowly. I'm reading them one a month as they originally appeared, in the order that they originally appeared. And this was the 5th Doc Savage novel. This was published in July of 1933. And it's excellent. It could be the best Doc Savage novel I've read so far. They do seem to they keep getting better, these Doc Savage adventures. An excellent adventure of Doc Savage and his companions. This particular edition is the Bantam paperback, and it was originally 19 in the series, even though it was published in the Pulp magazine as the 5th adventure. I don't know why they published these out of order when they did the paperback series back in the 60s and 70s. It must have been kind of jarring at times to read these out of order, because this does reference the previous adventure. In fact, all of the books so far have referenced previous adventures. I mean, this one starts right off where the last adventure left off, and it's weird that they did that. I mean, all of the books have been excellent, so I don't know why they did that. But this was awesome. And I'm glad I'm reading these in order, and I do recommend that you do that if you read these, if it's possible. Not that you can't read these out of order. They're all standalone adventures, but there's a lot of references to other things that happened in Doc's adventures. So yeah, this was great. Pirate of the Pacific. It's an excellent adventure novel, as all of the Doc Savage novels have been. It is very much of its time. The period racism starts on page 1 with the first chapter, The Yellow Killers. It's the Yellow Killers. So, there's that. But that is pretty much expected from a pulp story from 1933. But the adventure itself is fantastic. So I really enjoyed it. Doc Savage, Pirate of the Pacific. This has been a really fun project so far, reading these Doc Savage books. So that was number 246. Number 247 was a really good book. It's interesting. This is a Brian Lumley book. This is The Whisperer and Other Voices, which I read for Horror Mayhem, the continuing event that happens every May. It was created by the Bookish Bryants, and it is an event dedicated to reading short horror fiction. Novels under 250 pages, novellas and short stories and stuff like that. And this is a book of short fiction from Brian Lumley. He who wrote the Necroscope books, which I gotta get back to, Roger. I just keep thinking, nothing can top the 3rd Necroscope book. It's got to be all downhill from there, right? But I'm sure they're great. I just haven't gotten to them. But I have read this just this week, and I really enjoyed it. He's pretty good with short fiction, Brian Lumley. Some of the endings to the stories are a little too tidy and neat, but not all of them. And this was just an excellent collection of stories. He's very much inspired and influenced by old pulp horror, the pulp horror that he read in Weird Tales, Robert E. Howard, and especially H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft is all over this book as far as his influence is concerned. But yeah, it's excellent. And the best story in here, I think, is the last one, which is a short novel. It includes a complete short novel, which is The Return of the Deep Ones, which is a sequel to The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. It's not as good as a Lovecraft story, but it's pretty good. It's kind of a pulp horror thing, starring the Deep Ones. It was excellent, and definitely I think the best thing in this book. Although this book is full of good stuff. So if you ever find a copy of this lying around, The Whisperer and Other Voices, I recommend it. It's fun. It has a brilliant cover. I forget the artist who did this cover, and I can't find his name inside the book. But Brian Lumley always had the great skulls on his cover, and here you've got a skull with spikes sticking out of its head and gigantic fangs. So, that's cool. So The Whisperer and Other Voices by Brian Lumley. A solid horror mayhem read. So I read that. And I finished one other book number 248, which was Star Trek Year 5, Volume 2, which I started a couple weeks ago and then put down. But I picked this back up and read the rest of it. And I liked it. I didn't like it as much as the first volume. The first half of this book isn't as good as the second half. The first half, which where they continue to have trouble with the Tholians, our Star Trek heroes. The artwork continues to be really good. The artwork in this series is excellent. All the characters look great. They all look like the characters. They all sound like the characters. They all act like the characters. And this is the story that I mentioned a couple weeks ago, where Sulu falls in love with the fish person. And people gave me a hard time for being creeped out that Sulu fell in love with a fish person. But you know what? I've read too much H.P. Lovecraft. I just have a prejudice against fish people, I guess. And I watched all those Creature from the Black Lagoon movies, and I just distrust fish people. But Sulu has no problem. But I don't like this particular fish person. This is a story very much that very much could only be written at this particular time in history. Our fish person who Sulu falls in love with is a genderless fish person. And, he gives this big judgy speech to Sulu. It's like, well, thank you for fish-splaining to me that Sulu's single gender identity is lame, Fish people can turn into different genders, I guess. I don't know. He's kind of a judgy ass, I think, this fish person. And of course, it ends with Lovecraftian horror, because, of course it does. So we've got a huge Lovecraftian monster that shows up at the end. You can't trust the Deep Ones, Roger, even if they're from outer space. So, but I have to say, it wasn't badly written or anything like that. But I did enjoy the second adventure much better, with the return of Gary Seven, who we know if we have watched Star Trek. Only now Gary Seven is out to kill Captain Kirk. He wants to kill Captain Kirk and destroy the Enterprise. Why? We don't know yet. We don't know yet from just reading this book. So I have to continue on with Star Trek Year 5 with the third volume, which I have. And I'll probably get to that in a week or so. But that's the stuff I finished. That's not all the stuff that I read. Let's get to some other stuff that I read. Hey, things are picking up in Vney the Vampire. Finally, Vney is starting to act like a vampire again, Roger. And he's sucking people's blood. So, he took off after his wedding was destroyed, and he was revealed to be Vney the Vampire. He took off, and now he's in disguise again. And he's living secretly in a boarding house, But, the landlord of this boarding house, she has all these daughters, and finally Varney gets around to sucking some blood. So we have a vicious vampire attack. But the vampire is scared off. And could it be the mysterious colonel who's living here at the board? Could it be him? And could that mysterious colonel be Vney the Vampire? I don't know. It might be. So, continuing on with Vney, and now that some vampire stuff is actually happening, I might read more of this week. Finally, we get some more vampire stuff, Roger. I'm also reading the Fantastic Four. So I'm reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four, which started in 1961 and ended in 1996. And I'm in the John Byrne era. This is the second John Byrne omnibus. As you can see, She-Hulk has joined the team. At this point, the Thing is gone, messing around on another planet. So we don't get to see the Thing all that much. And I'm feeling the loss of the Thing. As good as these issues are, they're not the same without the Thing. To me, the Thing is a big part of the team. And so it's just not quite the Fantastic Four to me without the Thing. She-Hulk's, she's a She-Hulk, it's not. John Byrne loved She-Hulk, but I prefer the Thing myself. But in this next adventure, I'm at issue 273. I'm way behind. But Reed Richards finally finds his long-lost father, who's been living in an alternate dimension after time travel shenanigans. And he ends up being a character called the Warlord. He's the Warlord. But actually, he's just a dupe for this other. He married some woman who's taking advantage of him, So it looks to be that way. So yeah, Reed Richards finds his long-lost father in this other dimension, which is full of cowboys riding around on robot horses, which is kind of cool. So yeah, 273. That's where I'm at right now. I've got to pick up the pace on these. Hopefully the Thing will be back at some point. But, they're pretty cool anyway. So earlier this week, I had a video where I asked folks, hey, what's the next book I should read for Horror Mayhem? Horror Mayhem. And I got a lot of responses. Thank you for that. And I had two books that were neck and neck. Two books. I had Night Ride by Charles Beaumont and The Dark Domain by Stefan Grabinski. And these were just like neck and neck the whole way. But this one won. Charles Beaumont, he who wrote fantastic episodes of The Twilight Zone, won. And so I'm currently reading Night Ride and Other Journeys. For the Oddball in You, Flights into the Sinister and the Fantastic. And I'm just a couple stories in, but this guy could write. And Beaumont was great. He was just great. So, good choice, guys, for picking this. Although, I have so many requests to read this as well that I'm going to read this right after I read this. So I have at least two more Horror Mayhem books to read. This one and then this one. And I hear really great things about Grabinski, so I'm looking forward to that. And I already knew Beaumont was great, but I hadn't read this book. So yeah, I'm reading this one, Night Ride and Other Journeys. I'll tell you all about it next week. But so far, it's great. I mean, this guy... More people should know about Charles Beaumont, and more people should read his stories because he was fantastic. Died very, very young. And so we didn't get as much from him as, would have been nice to get. But the stuff he did write was fantastic. I mean, he's just excellent. So yeah, Night Ride and Other Journeys for Horror Mayhem. That's fantastic. I am reading one other thing at the moment. Because it is book track, I've been reading these Star Trek comics. And so I broke out the original Star Trek comic. This is the Gold Key Archives. So Gold Key was the first publisher to publish Star Trek comics. And they're really, really weird. And this edition is wonderful. This Gold Key Archives edition. I have another book with these stories in it, but it's not this nice at all. It's an old reprint. But this one has all of the covers. as you could see on the covers, Mr. Spock is front and center on all of them. Mr. Spock was the breakout character, I think, of the original Star Trek at the time. Even more so, I think, than Captain Kirk. And so he's heavily featured in the stories. And these stories are weird because the artists, there were a couple artists who did these first 6 issues, and they had never seen Star Trek, and all they had to work with were not old, they weren't old at the time, but some like black and white photos. They had never seen the show. And the writer, I don't believe, had seen the show either. So nobody's exactly in character. People are saying things that are, kind of weird. Still, despite that, these are excellent. These are excellent science fiction adventure stories. They're just kind of strange. And I will be doing an Epic Comic Book Wednesday this Wednesday on the first issue of the Gold Key Star Trek, which was something, man. That was a hell of an issue. This is the cover of the first issue. So yeah, catch me for Epic Comic Book Wednesday when we talk about the Planet of No Return. That should be fun. And I think that's everything I have to talk about this week, Roger. I desperately need coffee, so I'm going to go do that. Maybe eat some breakfast. Maybe I'll do that. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.